Kirk Cousins has confirmed that he is not going to get a contract extension before the start of this year, which makes 2023 a make or break season for him in a much truer sense of the phrase than any of the other times that we have said that. So let's get into it. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your increasingly haggard host, Luke Braun, and let's find some joy today. You can find the Locked On Vikings podcast wherever you find your favorite shows, whether that is an audio podcast listening app, whether that's YouTube or even Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Thank you so much to those of you who do listen to this show every single day. I appreciate you all so much. And today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL. They will throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. So today on the show, let's get into the Kirk Cousins situation. This is a quote from a couple days ago at the end of minicamp. Mandatory minicamp is over, by the way, so the Vikings will not reconvene again until the start of true proper training camp. So we've got like kind of 6 weeks to overanalyze it. But Kirk Cousins did have actually something salient to say. He was asked about his contract situation, and he had sort of spoken in the past in a way that sort of implied this, but in this way, he just like directly said it. He said that he does not expect to be in any contract negotiations before the season starts. He says, I think we're going to do that in March. And then that's that. And I'm just going to go to work. That's it. He was very direct about this, which he isn't often direct. I mean, he's a quarterback in a presser. There's all kinds of ways you can get in trouble, right? But that is the nature of the situation. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. He is not getting a contract before this season starts. He is also going to try to get a contract before next season starts, or before the final date where his contract voids. So the way that Kirk's contract works right now is that it's going to be like February 22nd or something like that. It's like a specified date in the language of the contract. His contract will automatically cut, and it won't expire at the start of the league year like other contracts will, but functionally it'll be like 2 weeks before that. So functionally he'll be a free agent for the free agency period of 2024, assuming nothing else gets changed. And the nature of this is that thanks to the big restructure that he did this March, that the Vikings did with his contract this March, which also was a big kind of indicator that, hey, he's not going to get a new contract extension because that would have made this restructure move kind of redundant. I mean, it bought them time to maybe negotiate another one, but now we know, okay, it's not happening. Should no changes happen, Kirk Cousins will carry a $28 million dead cap hit into 2024 and become a free agent. So the Vikings will take a $28 million penalty, and that'll be that. Kirk Cousins is now gone to his next team, and the Vikings move on to their next chapter. That currently does not exist in that structure. If you look at it the way the NFLPA official tracking of salary sees that, which the actual official tracking of salary doesn't care about future years. That's all just projection. You can be over the cap as much as you want. As long as you're under by the time it actually becomes that league year, you can overpromise as much as you want, right? You'd probably just have to cut people. But that currently exists in a structure of 4 different void years. For those of you who are unfamiliar, I did a whole video on the salary cap and kind of the mechanisms of how it works on my Patreon page, which is free to watch. You can find it. There's a banner at the top of the page there's one that says, "Let's count beans." Go click on that. I also explained this via beans. Bean counting is a good way to do this. On my Twitter page, you can find that tweet as well if you search it out. But basically, in the next 2 years, Kirk Cousins will carry let's say that the Vikings signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year extension at 0 additional money. He decided he was going to play for free for the Vikings, which is actually against the rules, but just bear with me. So let's say he decided he was going to play for free for 4 years for the Vikings. His cap hit in 2024 would be $10.25 million. Same in 2025, and then it would be like $4 million or something like that in the next 2 years. And that's because there's been a couple of restructures that have gone into void years at different lengths that have sort of spread the money out that way. So if that would be the way that it works. And that's one way to think about it. If you're going to do an extension, those cap hits stay in place, right? The way this works is the second his contract voids, or the release, the February release gets triggered, all of that money will accelerate. Meaning now the Vikings will have to pay off everything, even though that was supposed to be a 2027 cap hit. Now they have to pay off everything in the 2024 cap environment, and that all adds up to $28 million. So that's the way it works. But let's say that they gave him a 1-year extension for some undetermined amount of money. Don't worry about the number. Then that 10.25 for 2024 would stay in place, and everything else would stay out of 2024. It would just add to, so let's say you gave him, he decided he would play for a $30 million base salary. Easy number, probably way too low, but just to keep the numbers easy. So his cap hit would be 42.25 or 40.25 million for 2024. And then next year, the rest of the money that's left over would accelerate, leaving, I think that adds up to like 18 million and change would be the dead cap hit. Instead of a $28 million dead cap hit in 2024, it'd be 18 mil in 2025. That's the way that things will like spread out and into future years, right? That's the system in which we are working if we want to try to get an extension done with Kirk Cousins. And what you can do, let's say the amount you agree to is going to be $40 million, right? Instead of taking a $50 million cap hit in 2024, which, I mean, I guess you could figure out a way to do by making money elsewhere, you would maybe still have some of that be signing bonus that would spread into the next 3 years. And maybe you shave 10 million off of that. Restructure, it would be like what would that be? A 13 or a 12.5 million or something like that restructure, $13.3 million restructure that would then push 10 mil into 2025, 2026, and 2027, and then leave it as that $30 million base salary plus just a little bit of signing bonus that's left over, right? He would have like a $42 million cap hit or something, which feels a little bit more reasonable in the cap environment that 2024 will be. Then you would have a 28 mil dead cap hit in 25 in 20, so 2 years from now, but that'll be a bigger cap environment. So 28 million 2 years from now is easier to stomach than 28 million 1 year from now, because the cap will probably have gone up. That'll be a lower percentage of the resources available to you. So you could kind of work it out that way. And then you have, you've got your bridge quarterback, and you're not going into the 2024 draft without a feasible plan at quarterback. That's what Kwesi really wants. That's what the Wills really want. So that might be the way that all of this plays out. The problem with this is, I mean, the problem is going to be, that's like a lot of money to bring into books. You're going to also have Hawkinson extension, Jefferson extension, all that stuff's going to start to add up. But the real issue is going to be timing, because this is a situation, as Kirk Cousins has described it, they're going to get at it in March, maybe February. Like, that's going to be something that is on a pretty tight schedule. The regular season ends in like mid-January now, like January 10th or 11th or 12th or whatever that Sunday is going to be the last game of the regular season, let alone if they make the playoffs, that elongates the season more. And if Cousins doesn't expect to be negotiating this extension, you're going to kind of have a really tight window to do it. And when there's a lot of space in between two parties, which maybe there is, maybe the Vikings are saying, we don't want to give you a second year in 2025. And Kirk Cousins wants a second year in 2025. That's a huge problem. That's a way bigger problem than, there's 10 million between what he's asking and what we're willing to give. We've got to find a middle ground. That's a little more solvable, especially with some time to really talk about it, versus, oh my God, we just want completely separate things. We have to figure out some kind of solution, and we've got about 14 seconds to do it. That's like not going to happen. So that feels like it's also going to be a thing. So if the Vikings want Kirk Cousins to be their quarterback in 2024, and that's a decision they're not going to make until they've seen 2023, feels like that's going to be a difficult thing to achieve. Not impossible, but there's definitely going to be some challenges to that. So that kind of raises the question, what does Kirk Cousins need to do to make that happen? What does he need to do to get a contract? And the nature of that system, honestly, is going to be kind of unfair to him. And that's just kind of the way the NFL is. That's life. So we'll go into some of that more philosophical stuff as well. Before I do so, however, I want to talk to you about pants. Bird Dog pants, in particular, they make you look good. They have stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you that truly beautiful, sculpted, juicy, and possibly, if you're down for it, oily look. Bird Dog shorts do the same thing as, say, Lululemon, but they fit way better. And they fit a lot better than like regular shorts that are often made of a stiff, restricting cotton. They fix this issue by developing a cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, so you get all the same like fashionable benefits of that, but it stretches, so you get a much slimmer fit without actually having to sacrifice movement or comfort. They also have an anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So go to birddogs.com/lockedonnfl for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnfl for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. Hey, thank y'all so much for those of you who do listen to this show every single day, especially here in June when things are a little bit slower. This is when I think we can have some of the coolest conversations because we can talk about whatever we want. So thank you guys so much. If you're interested in more stuff about this, especially if all of that cap stuff was just dizzying, which it can be for some people, that you know, people that didn't like math class, go to my Patreon page, go to the Let's Count Beans video. It's free to watch, and hopefully it'll explain some of those systems to you with a visual aid, which I know for me, like that really helped me get it for the first time. So maybe that'll help you as well. But kind of moving on, I think this raises the question. Okay, so we're going to get to this moment in January or February of 2024, where the Vikings are going, okay, we have to decide if Kirk Cousins is going to be our quarterback for 2024. We know what it's going to take. You know, we've negotiated a little bit. We have this idea of what it's going to take. It'll probably be a substantial cost on the salary cap. And we have to decide if we want to do what it takes to get him there, right? Maybe there's a moment where, you know, maybe there's just too much between the sides, like I said before, and we can't do this at all. Maybe we get there. But there's like probably going to be a moment where we say, are we doing this? And the last thing in the Vikings' mind will be however the 2023 season ended. And that kind of makes us ask, okay, what happens that gets Kirk Cousins there? There's been a lot of speculation from Ari Mirov, is that his name? The like PFF insider guy, or, you know, people on sports radio and all this. Like, there's been a lot of talk about, is this the last year for Kirk Cousins? And sort of reading into that quote as much as you can. That quote was pretty dry from Kirk Cousins. It was, you know, nope, we're going to probably do that next March. I'm here to play right now. That was kind of it. So anything else you add to that, like at its face value, it was informative, but very dry, very Associated Press. If you want to add any editorialization to that, that's kind of coming from you, and I'm trying not to do that. But for a lot of people, it's kind of coming to this, oh, this is it then. Kirk's done. It's over. And he was very clear. It is not over. It absolutely is a thing that could happen in March or February of next year. Kirk Cousins said March, but I think by the way the calendar works and by the date the new league year happens on it, I think it has to be February. Typically these void year things happen like 21 days before the new league year or something, which would be February. But that's pedantry. The point is, we will reach a moment where we're looking back on the 2023 season and deciding if that's good enough. So what's good enough? And for me, I think it's a team level thing. I couldn't see a world where Kirk Cousins throws for 5,000 yards, but the Vikings go 8-9. I don't think that is the world where Kirk Cousins is the one that is brought back. And that might not be fair, but it feels a little bit like it has to be a bigger team level thing. And I don't know. I'll get into it in a sec, because I think on a greater level, there is something to the Kirk Cousins era of the Vikings that has rendered everything else that happens on them a little bit moot. It doesn't really matter what the Vikings do. They're kind of always the Kirk Cousins team. And I think that nature is just going to, whether it's fair or not, and whether it's correct or not, it's just like one of those subliminal things that will just hang a cloud over everything if you go 8-9. Even if he has a fantastic season and they go 8-9 because like the defense is bad or something like that. I don't think that level of like nuance is powerful enough to overturn the like a decision for the Vikings to move on. Because again, Kwesi didn't sign these contracts, right? He's done some restructures. He's done some like extension sort of Band-Aid deal things because he inherited a situation where Kirk Cousins was slated to make $45 million in a cap environment that couldn't handle that. So this is not something he has been pretty wishy-washy in his opportunities to truly commit to Kirk Cousins. If he was really, really into Kirk Cousins, if it was, hey, I'm coming to be the GM of the Minnesota Vikings and I'm excited about it because I'm excited to work with Kirk Cousins, that would have been a 3-year deal back in 2022, not a 1-year weenie extension with a clear path out and a possibility to restructure with more void years to even lower that cap hit, right? So I don't think... I don't know. It does not feel like the Vikings are really all that into it right now. So how does Kirk Cousins change their mind? And of course, play well enough. But I really think it requires, this is what I'm building up to. It requires a very deep playoff run. I don't think you can sneak in as a 6 seed and go get beat, right? I think you got to win the division. You got to win your home playoff game. And I think you got to even maybe, or at least be one of the teams that looks like they belonged in the divisional round. You need to be if you lose in the divisional round, it's got to be like that 49ers Cowboys game, not like the Giants Eagles game where that thing was over by halfway through the second quarter. That when I say deep playoff run, I'm basically talking about conference championships with possible exceptions for teams in the divisional round, because Bengals, Bills, like, all right, well, both of those teams felt like they were deep playoff teams and one of them's got to lose, right? That's what I mean when I say deep playoff run. They really got to be the class of the NFC, like in the class of the NFC. Be up there with the Eagles, and I guess the 49ers will probably be up there if they can figure out what in God's name is going on at quarterback. Maybe the Cowboys, those teams. And not in the way that they were last year where they kind of had the record, but nobody really respected them in that same way. And then they lose in the first round of the playoffs and it validates all that. That's what I think needs to happen. And you know what? Yeah, there is some of that stuff that's just outside of Kirk Cousins' control. Cousins, again, he could throw for 5,000 yards, put up 35 a game, and the defense could put up 38, could give up 38 a game, and they end up going 500 and missing the playoffs. Absolutely an outcome. And I think in that outcome, Kirk Cousins doesn't get the extension because you're not going to look at an 8-9 team and say, all right, let's run this thing back. And I guess that's the last point of this is, I think I finally cracked it, why everybody still thinks that the Vikings are like running it back. Even though they've gotten rid of a ton of people, they brought in new people. There's new starters all over the defense, new defensive scheme, like pretty major tweaks to the offensive scheme. No Dalvin Cook, no Adam. Like there's so many changes to the Vikings that have happened, but people are still like, yeah, well, clearly they won't go 13-4 like they did again, but it's kind of the same team. And I think it's just because it's the same quarterback. I really do. I don't know. I'll try to clarify my philosophy on that. The reputation of the Minnesota Vikings under Kirk Cousins has mystified me for some time. Kirk Cousins does not mystify me. I think he's a fairly easy quarterback to get a handle on. His strengths and weaknesses and who he is and all of that stuff is fairly straightforward. But the way that he is perceived doesn't match that. Like for me, the way that he plays, he's got his strengths, he's got his weaknesses, he's a guy that does that. But the way that he is perceived is as this bastion for everything that's bad about being okay. Like he is truly the symbol for why it is bad to be just fine. And I've never agreed with that philosophy. Fine is fine. Bad is bad. Fine is fine. Fine is not bad. And I believe in using precise language in that case, when people say, well, they're just going to be, mediocre. Mediocre means middle. You mean bad. Just say bad and say it with your whole chest. Like say what you mean, that's just that kind of part of who I am in life too. But with Kirk is not bad. No. And if you say, do you think Kirk Cousins is a bad quarterback? I don't think a lot of people would say, yeah, no, he is bad. Put him out there with, Sam Darnold and, Deshaun Kaiser, who are these like bad, because you wouldn't bench Kirk Cousins for, somebody else, for Baker Mayfield, right? Like that's what I feel like when you say a quarterback is bad, you're talking about this guy like shouldn't be starting or shouldn't be on a roster. And nobody would say that about Kirk Cousins. He's fine. He's got his arm talent. When he's really hot, he's hot. Then he gets cold, and he can be cold for a long time, and that can be really restrictive. And he can get into his conservative Kirk thing. We've got a whole chaos meter for when he's too conservative, and sometimes he's too chaotic, and he throws boneheaded interceptions. And he'll get 3 picks and a fumble in a game, and you're going, "Oh my God, Kirk, what are you doing?" And then another game, he has an 8 out of 2, and you're like, what happened here? And then he finds that middle ground, and he gets hot, and he's unstoppable. And that all exists in the ethos of Kirk Cousins. Is a fairly up and down, boom and bust kind of guy that makes for very exciting TV. And yet, when you listen to people talking about the Vikings, it's like sort of this assumption, they're just going to be like a boring, okay, middle team, 500. We don't really need to talk about them. It's like there's this boringness to it. And the reason I'm going into all this, I'm not just trying to complain about the media, is because I think that vibe, that so-so energy, whether you're aware of it or not, no matter what you do to try to put it out of your mind, is going to affect something like a decision to make Kirk Cousins your quarterback to the tune of $40 million a year for 1 or 2 more seasons. It's a major decision to make. And when you're thinking about it, it's hard not to think about, well, here we are, 8 wins again. We really buying into more of this. And that's so wrong. It's a team sport. There's so much more that goes into it that's so reductive and wrong to think that way. But it's really hard to get it all the way out of your head. And in something like a contract negotiation, which has many moving parts, from the GM to Rob Brzezinski to people drafting up the contract to people negotiating, agents, Kirk Cousins himself, Kevin O'Connell. There's many people involved in that. And when you have an apparatus that it's not just one person making a decision. It's not, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah sitting on the Madden controls going, how much should I put into this contract offer? Clicking the up button a couple times to make sure that he takes the deal. It's a lot of moving parts. And the more moving parts and the more people that you introduce to that system, the more opportunity you have for something like the middling energy of the Vikings to get involved in that. And, if you look at it totally objectively, like a Martian with none of the baggage comes down and says, I'm going to be a fan of the Minnesota Vikings, and here's what I think they should do. You could have an argument for that person. You could maybe see that Martian advocating for extending Kirk Cousins because here's his EPA, here's what he does well, it's enough, and blah, 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 and it's worth the money for this reason, that. Like, you could see him making that argument. You could see him making an argument against as well. But what I don't foresee is that argument being rooted in, well, they've tried it for 6 years and it didn't work. And again, I'm assuming that 2023 is a 500 year for the sake of this thought experiment. Now, if they win 12, 13 games again and get a deep playoff run, this changes everything. And I think that that's important to acknowledge. But if they do just kind of have another season where they're good, not great, a lot of people really, really hate it being good, not great. And I think it's just because it's like the best way to lose a Super Bowl and not have a good draft pick. Or not win the Super Bowl, but also not have a good draft pick. And those are the two things, I guess, that can be an outcome of a season, which is really reductive and frankly immature. I hear it every day, so I get it. But ultimately, that system and the way that bias, like people who are susceptible to bias, which includes all people, are ultimately going to be the ones making this decision. And that is a system that is fundamentally unfair to Kirk Cousins. And there's nothing anybody can do about that. Nothing you can do about that. Nothing Kirk can do about that. Nothing Kwesi can do about that. It's just the way human brains work and human brains make this decision. And that could lead to a really funny world where maybe Kirk Cousins just has a stinker of a year and this is easy, right? Or maybe he has a phenomenal year and the Vikings are phenomenal and it's easy. I'm speaking in the world where it isn't. And the world where it isn't is one where the Vikings do well enough where they win 10 games in the division and you go, well, are you really going to go into a rebuild with a new quarterback? You just won 10 games. And this is kind of the moment where the Vikings say yes to that, I think. But that becomes a much harder yes. And this is the world where that can be a yes, even if it's not Kirk's fault. He might still end up a free agent and working the market. And it might even be good for him to work the market. If the Vikings are going to be stingy about things, maybe the open market is better. There will be lots of teams going into 2024 needing a quarterback. And who knows how many of all of these college guys that everybody's excited about will actually play well, and how many of them will Spencer Rattler their way into obscurity. It is certainly an interesting moment. And I think for you and me, fans, I think all we can do is try to shut those biases out as much as possible and be objective about this, right? Um, Look at Kirk Cousins for what he offered to the Vikings in 2023, and do we want to buy into more of that? That is all the question that we need to ask. Not are we buying into more of 9-win seasons? It's are we buying more into what this guy contributes to an effort to do better than 9? That's the question we need to ask and the way we need to frame it. And I'm sure we will talk about it ad nauseum. February 2023 on this show is going to be a very interesting month. I can promise you that. Hopefully all the months are interesting. We'll see you guys Monday. I don't know what we'll talk about. Probably some everyman stuff, maybe some X's and O's if I get into it. Although I kind of did my run game thing I really wanted to do. I want to talk about the backup O-line too, like the Brandells and the Vidarian Lows. That's all really fun. I will see you all Monday. And as always, Skull.